late 1990s, my brother Michael was moderator of the Christian Church in the United States and Canada. Moderator's kind of like being chair of the board at the congregation. It means that you preside over administrative committee meetings, general board meetings, and you get to preside at one General Assembly. The following General Assembly, in 2001, my brother and I entered the Assembly Hall for the opening night worship. General Assemblies are attended by thousands of people, and opening night is always a large crowd. So we walked into the Assembly Hall, and I started thinking, well, I wonder where we're going to sit. We were not particularly early. My brother is never particularly early. And so I said, well, where should we sit? And he said, well, let's come on, we'll just head up front. And I thought to myself, well, all the seats up front are going to be taken. There's not going to be anywhere to sit. And we just kept walking, and finally we got right up in front of the stage. And there was a little area there that was roped off with an usher, and my brother trotted out 2 passes, and we hopped on into the reserved seating section. There apparently was a VIP area, which apparently included former moderators and their brothers. So we went in and made our way to some seats, and my brother greeted the man who was sitting right in front of us. And when he turned around to return the greeting, I recognized that we were sitting right behind Dr. A. Dale Fires. Now, when I was growing up, the name A. Dale Fires was spoken in my home and in other places, always with great admiration and respect. A. Dale Fires was Executive Secretary of the International Convention, which was the post that became moderator of the General Assembly when we changed the names. He was the president of the United Christian Missionary Society, which became our Disciples Home Missions and Global Missions. He was in that post for 15 years. He was one of the architects of the design, which is still the document by which our denomination operates. He held posts in the National Council of Churches and World Council of Churches, and I was sitting right behind him. It was just really cool. There we were in the VIP area, sitting with Dr. A. Dale Fires. Now, if I hadn't been with my brother, who had those passes, and I had gone up there and said, oh, there's Dr. Fires, I think I'll go sit with him, then the nice usher there at the reserved area would, I'm sure, politely said, well, sir, I'm sorry, but you need a pass to get in here. You'll have to go sit in the back of the room. Now, I noticed that in July at the General Assembly in Orlando, there didn't seem to be a VIP seating area. I think they've done away with those. Nonetheless, this morning we're going to hear from Jesus, and he's going to be talking about seating arrangements at dinner parties. Interesting topic for Jesus, isn't it? You know how it is when you go to a wedding rehearsal dinner or the reception afterwards, if it's a sit-down dinner reception, you walk in the room, and what's the first thing you say? Where should we sit? You don't, if the places are all marked, then that takes care of the problem. But sometimes it's open seating. And so you sit there and you think, well, gosh, I want to be careful. I don't want to sit, that table might be reserved for the bride and groom's parents over there. And sometimes you say, well, let's sit over there because that's near the buffet table. It's a matter of strategy. Because you don't want to be caught sitting somewhere and somebody comes up to you and says, I'm sorry, but could we ask you to move to another table because we've saved this one for the groom's great uncle's family. Now, Jesus is not just talking about wedding receptions and rehearsal dinners. When Jesus uses the term banquet, that's a code word for the reign of God. And he's talking about who sits where, who is in the places of honor in the reign of God. Now, how do we know that? How do we know that's what he's talking about? Well, when we get down to verse 11, Jesus is going to say, all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. We know that humility goes a long way in God's eyes. We know that Jesus talks about what's called the great reversal. Those who think they are first will be last, and those who think they're last will become first in the reign of God. And we also know that humility can be a real issue, can't it? We know people, we know by way of celebrities what happens to them lots of times when they lose their humility. We know even among our families and friends, those who fail to be humble. Some years ago, I was on staff at church camp, and we had a professional musician there with us, and the two of us were working together to plan and conduct the worship services. One evening, there's a young woman, very, very talented. She's recorded some of her own music. She's performed at lots of really major church gatherings. Extremely talented. One evening, she was getting some song lyrics ready to put on the PowerPoint. And I said, how much longer do you need, before you're ready? And she said, when everybody gets here, when everybody arrives, I'll be ready to go. And so I was just paying attention to people coming in, and when everybody got there, I stood up and started the service. And I looked back and saw that she was still working. So I made some on-the-fly adjustments to the service, and we carried on. And after the service, she came up to me and said, don't ever do that to me again. Don't ever start the service when I'm not ready. In this, what did you think you were doing, tone of voice? And I said, well, you told me that, when everybody got there, to go ahead and start, that you'd be ready. My read of things is that she has had so much success at such a young age that she has gotten the idea that the universe revolves around her. And I've heard the same story about her from other people who have worked with her in similar situations. And I wouldn't be anxious to work with her again, which is a shame, because she's really talented and does a lot of things really well. A little humility goes a long way in the reign of God and in God's eyes. We know that's the case. Notice that Jesus does not say all who exalt themselves may be humbled, or all those who exalt themselves should be humbled. He says all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. A word to the wise. But Jesus is not just talking to people who attend dinner parties and banquets and look toward the reign of God in that direction. He then turns in this story to his host and has some words for the person who's hosting this gathering. And here's what he says. He says, when you give a luncheon or a dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors, in case they may invite you in return, and you would be repaid. What? Has he gone from giving good advice to being just crazy? Don't invite your relatives, your friends, your neighbors? Well, so who are you going to invite if that's not the people on your guest list? Well, he says, but when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind. Really? Well, Who's going to provide transportation for them? Who's going to tell them where to sit? Who's going to help them eat if they need help eating? Invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind. Well, here again, Jesus is not just talking about dinner parties. In fact, he's probably not talking about dinner parties at all. He uses that word banquet again. He's talking about the reign of God. He says, when you invite those kinds of people, you will be blessed, because they cannot repay you. For you will be repaid in the resurrection of the righteous. When you invite people who need help, you will be repaid in the resurrection of the righteous. The list may change. The list of people who need and receive special care from God. Those who need to receive special care from us. Although poor, blind, lame, that's not a bad list. We host here at Timberlake Christian a school for children with autism. The Christian church in Virginia every summer has a camp for economically disadvantaged children, usually who often come with special needs and are often at risk. They also host a camp for those with mental difficulties. It's probably a long list that we could establish of those who need to be invited. And we need to work on our invitation skills. We disciples tend to be not very good at inviting. We rightly don't want to come across as pushy. We rightly want to talk to others about faith with a good dose of humility. But at the same time, we know that most people come to a church because someone has invited them. Word of mouth is still the best advertising. And that's as true in the church as it is elsewhere. We need to work at getting over our reluctance to say to people, would you like to come with me and visit this Sunday morning? There are a lot of ways in which we can do that. And there are a lot of people out there who need what we have to offer. They may be people who haven't found a way to connect with God somewhere else, or haven't found a way to connect with God at all. They may be people who have been put off by other forms of organized religion for one reason or another. They may be people who think that they wouldn't be welcome and accepted because of the way they look, or the way they think, or because of past choices they have made. We offer here, I hope, a vision of a graceful, merciful, welcoming God, an accepting and forgiving God. And we know that there are people who live not far from here who need to share that vision and who need to share that experience of God. We need to find ways to get over our reluctance to say, would you like to come and visit with me? Because it's all about hospitality. It's all about welcoming. It's all about who gets seats at God's banquet table. It's about helping those who need us. Emily Town says, for Jesus, extending genuine hospitality to the least of these through acts of unselfish hospitality and kindness can bring God's blessing over us and give us a sense of the great blessing that is to come in the resurrection. We can invite others to come to God's great banquet table. And we can even do so with a good dose of humility. Because humility goes a long way in God's eyes.